Yes. So good evening everybody. Today we will take up test 6 discussion. Last week I planned to do test 5 and 6, but since we could not finish test 6 last week, today we will wind up test 6 discussion, and next week we will take up 7 and 8 together. Okay. This test involves broadly two topics. It involves theories and it also involves topics from research methods. So some topics from theories are involved and other topics from research methods are involved in this test. Research methods are very easy, simple and straightforward. There are 4 questions from this section. So we'll first finish questions from research methods and then we will look into the 6 questions from theories. So what are the questions from research methods? We have 1, 4, 6, 10. These are the questions from research methods, and from theories we have questions number 2, 3, 5, 7, 8 and 9. So these are the questions from theories. We'll first quickly wind up these because these are very simple and easy, right? We'll begin with first question, that is interview approach. Now, whenever you have a question from research methods, please follow. It's a very simple topic. If you follow, do you have the question paper? If you follow a simple framework, the whole thing becomes very simple. That is, first define, and if you can't define, at least describe the method. And if there is any principle for the method, describe the principle of the method. Then talk about things, some various features, things like features or steps or something like guidelines or method. Then discuss its advantages and finally close with disadvantages or limitations, and in all of this add examples of anthropologists. Wherever anthropologists are relevant, try to include examples. If any particular anthropologist has used a particular method, you can use it, describe that. For example, whenever you talk about participant observation, definitely talk about Malinowski, Margaret Mead, and you can, for schedules and questionnaires, you can describe Morgan. For case study, you can use Geets. So we can use these examples. Now first, interview approach. What is interview approach? Interview is a guided conversation. It is a guided conversation where an interviewer tries to get various data from the correspondent. So it's a form of questioning characterized by fact that it employs verbal questioning as a principal technique. This is the definition, and here there is a difference. So we have two kinds of studies. Some are called as qualitative studies, others are called as quantitative studies. So qualitative, and after describing this, you can also talk about the different types of interviews. We have broadly 3 types of interviews: structured interview, unstructured interview and semi-structured interview. Structured interview means interview based on strict procedures. Unstructured interview is one where we have no strict procedures, and semi-structured is, it has elements of both, that is some procedures and some not so important procedures. That is a mix of flexibility as well as rigidity. And then we can link. So in case of qualitative studies, we employ unstructured interviews. So in which kind of studies do we use unstructured interviews? We use it for qualitative studies. And in case of quantitative studies, we generally use semi-structured interviews. And semi-structured interviews are used in case of both qualitative as well as quantitative studies. So we can use this demarcation to explain in which mode we use which interview. Then here we have the common steps for interview, then describe the advantages, and finally disadvantages. Among the advantages, some are routine points like flexibility, cost, time and all this, but some are very unique points. What are the unique points for interview approach? First is we can observe non-verbal behavior. Suppose you send a questionnaire or schedule, they'll manually fill and send it back to you. You don't know whether that fellow was angry when reading a question, he was emotional, he was upset. All those emotions you can't gauge. So non-verbal behavior can be whether he was uncomfortable. So all of those cannot be gauged, because that's why in interview it is more authentic and it is more personal. And because in interview you have one-to-one on-the-spot questioning, we also can get more spontaneous answers, and you can ask counter questions. In interview we can ask counter questions, whereas in follow-up questions can be asked, whereas in schedule questionnaire we have no option to ask follow-up. Some questions may require more deliberation, so for those you can ask follow-ups in case of interview. Disadvantages, of course, obviously it is costly and time consuming, inconvenient, and major disadvantage is no anonymity. We know who the people are and what are their answers. And as a result of this tends to be less effective than other methods when we are talking about sensitive issues like personal life, sexual issues, private lives. So all these are in such topics, a person may not be comfortable opening up to the interviewer if you talk about their private lives or secretive issues. So for sensitive issues, interview may not be suitable. And of course there is a bias of the interviewer. Interviewer may have some bias in terms of how he perceives the answer. Interviewer may have a bias in terms of what areas he'll ask more questions. In some areas he may ignore asking questions altogether. So the bias of the person who is asking questions can step in interview format. Next is schedules and questionnaires. First, both of them are similar with some minor differences. So one student drew this table. I found this table very good, so that's why I picked it up to show to all of you. So in one of the scripts, one student drew a very interesting table to give us the differences between questionnaire and schedule. This is a very good way of presenting. So please try to use such tables to present key features. Instead of describing in great detail what is schedule, what is questionnaire, you can just draw a table like this and explain. So what is questionnaires? In questionnaires, it's like both of them involve a form. Like you prepare a form and send this. In questionnaire, a form is sent by post or online. Like for example, we submit online surveys, that is questionnaire. Schedules is where it's like, for example, during census operations, what happens? Somebody comes with a form and then fills the form and takes your detail. They're not giving you the form, but they take the details and fill it themselves. That is questionnaire. And because of that, questionnaire is mostly used when you have in literate populations, whereas schedule can be used in case of non-literate section also, because somebody else is doing the filling up of the form. And there are other features like delays, costs and responsiveness. So you can describe how both of them are similar in the sense that they use a form or a preset type of questions, but then both of them also share these differences. Then advantages. What are the easy advantages of schedule questionnaire? The fact that they are less expensive, quick results, and you can gather large amounts of data. You can quickly gather large amounts of data in this vast data. And wide coverage. You can cover wide number of respondents across different areas, and it offers anonymity and also offers convenience to respondents because they can respond at their time of convenience and they can take their own time and all that. They can respond by being in a particular place. They need not travel to the place of interview and so on. And because of all of this, it is less scope for bias. So schedule and questionnaire are impersonal methods of data collection. They are impersonal methods of data collection, and because of this, it offers a considered and objective view. There is more objectivity in this method than in other methods. Then we have some limitations. What are the limitations of schedule and questionnaire? First issue is that you can't ask follow-up, that is, you can't probe, ask deeper questions, then we don't have identity. As a result, sometimes people may fake. What is the guarantee that the person who is filling the questionnaire is giving you all genuine answers? What if he or she is faking? What if he or she gives you partial answers? What if he or she is not being completely true or disclosing all the issues? So all these are concerns that we have here, and as a result we can't also collect additional information because we can't ask follow-up questions. Partial responses are possible, and we also can't see whether they have followed the particular order. You must have, for example, in some questionnaires you want them to order questions in a particular order. What if they skipped the order and they went ahead, read the whole thing? And what if the previous questions, if you saw the next questions, then you know the answer of previous questions. So if somebody reads the entire questionnaire and then responds in a way they want to. So all these are issues with schedules and questionnaires. And the most important issue with schedule and questionnaire is what questions do you choose to put in the questionnaire. So whenever we are preparing questionnaire, the researcher has to consider some guidelines. So we have to be careful about certain way in which we are forming the questions. First, all the questions we are putting in the study must be relevant to the research. Questions should not be worded ambiguously, and they should not be non-specific, and they should not be hypothetical questions. These kind of questions must be avoided. Then leading or presumptive questions which are trying to create some kind of impression, which are trying to judge, which are trying to embarrass, or questions which are about personal issues, all such questions should be avoided in the questionnaire. And if possible, use the language of the local people. That is, if they speak local language or tribal language, try to include the local language in the questionnaire, and make sure you have an easy flow and logical progression of questions. These must be maintained in a questionnaire. Next, we will go to 10th question, that is participant observation. Then we will come back to fieldwork tradition, because once we do participant observation, fieldwork tradition is very, very easy. So this is a very famous and popular question because most students prepare this, and we discuss this because of Malinowski's contribution to it. So first, you can start with what is observation, and then observation has different types: participant, non-participant, and semi-participant, or it's a mix of both participant and non-participant observation. Non-participant observation is you are just observing without being part of the culture, whereas participant means it's a technique where you spend long periods in the people, study them by learning their language, and study them as a member of their society. So you can describe the contribution of Malinowski in making this method popular, and he was the first to conduct fieldwork through native language. We can also highlight this aspect. And then whenever you're going to participant observation, we have to make sure certain points are kept in mind. That is, you must have a good understanding of research topic. If the people have any specific peculiarities, you must keep those in mind. And the person who is doing participant observation must have adaptability and flexibility. You can't be rigid. You should learn to change yourself, change the way you do research, change the way you ask questions depending on the situation. And you should also have the ability to multitask. That is, you should be able to observe several issues and several concepts at the same time. And also, you should have, this is very, very important, familiarity with the categories. That is, you should not ask questions in terms of your worldview or based on your thinking. You should identify what are the categories that are very relevant to the local person, that are very relevant to the object of study, and you should frame your entire study in terms of the categories or the worldview of the person you are trying to study, not in terms of your own worldview. And finally, whenever you have participant observation, you must have the ability to overcome unexpected problems and conflicts, because a lot of times in the field, things will not be totally in your control. And if something does not work as per plan, you should be prepared to deal with unexpected scenarios. That is, you should there's a popular saying that you must expect the unexpected. So be prepared for unexpected problems and learn to handle them. Then advantages. very easy. First is you are very close to reality. You are studying people in their natural structure. So this offers authentic and detailed or in-depth study of people, and it offers first-hand information. There is no information adulteration or information damage, and you also can collect data when respondents are unable or unwilling to cooperate or to offer information. And you can also collect a wide range of information when the information then because you are being present in the study, you are experiencing, you are witnessing huge amount of activity, so you can always pick and choose what you want to study. Next, these are also relatively inexpensive. Then you have huge number of limitations. What are the limitations? First, they cannot be participant observation can be done for one study only. You can't use this method to study multiple groups at one go, and you can't use this for private lives, things like which are secretive to people like sexual behavior, family violence and all that. And in participant observation you have lot of bias of the people, bias of the researcher, and you can't also do quantitative generalizations. That is, you can't like do some kind of statistical analysis. I studied 100 societies. Of the 100, in 50 societies there is patrilineal, in 30 there is matrilineal, and so on. So you cannot do statistical or quantitative analysis of results. And finally, we have lot of ethical issues around whether you should, first of all, how do you study the people, and how much of should you publish. In publication of the details, should you maintain discretion about people's personal life, should you maintain anonymity of people, how do you deal with sensitive issues that may come up during research, and if research is published, will it help the people or will it harm them? So all these ethical issues must also be taken into consideration whenever somebody does participant observation, right? That is 10th question. Now we will do 6th question. That is the last question in research methodologies. This question is also very similar to participant observation. I've just asked this for the sake of coverage of syllabus, because this question also appears in exam quite a few times. First, define fieldwork tradition. What is fieldwork? Fieldwork is the study of people and their culture. In their natural habitat. This is fieldwork. And then discuss the history of fieldwork in anthropology. So discuss where do we begin? We begin with initially we had evolutionists who did only armchair anthropology, and then the beginnings are made by L.H. Morgan, though he did not do field work strictly, but he tried to study people directly. Especially he attempted to study the Iroquois Indians, and field work got more thrust with Franz Boas, who focused on the study of Kwakiutl people. And Franz Boas, his approach of data first, theory later, also was in tune with the required mindset or ideology needed for extensive field work. After Franz Boas, you had Hudden and W.H.R. Rivers, who took an expedition to the Torres Straits, and field work finally. And then you also had A.R.R. Brown, Radcliffe Brown, who did field work among the Andaman Islanders. And field work got huge thrust with, of course, the work of Malinowski, who went to and Trobriand Islanders and took up participant observation. And after Malinowski, you can also talk about culture personality studies. Here we have fieldwork done by people like Mead and even Cora Dubois. She did fieldwork among the Alor people and she administered many projective tests. And then in Africa, there was fieldwork done on African political systems by, who did this? Yes, Mayer Fortes and Evans Pritchard. So trace all this history of fieldwork. This is the broad history of fieldwork, and then after tracing the history, discuss the importance of fieldwork. This is again just like participant observation. The content again is similar to participant observation, and then talk about the different guidelines for fieldwork, and lastly problems with fieldwork. So under importance of fieldwork, you can talk about how fieldwork, just like we talked about advantages of participant observation, describe that, and in addition you can talk about how this method reduces ethnocentrism and helps us understand things in more detailed and realistic way, and talk about what are the steps we need to take for fieldwork, like being sensitive to people, learning their language, trying to get data from wide range of sources and not just data from one section of society, making sure there is no bias. So those are some guidelines that, and language should be that of locals, and no hasty conclusions. So cross-checking data, all these are guidelines for fieldwork. And then problems, here again discuss the issues that we discussed under participant observation. So the content for fieldwork tradition and the content for participant observation will have a lot of overlap, right? So that this winds up questions from research methods. Next we will discuss questions from anthropological theories, that is 2, 3, 5, 7, 8 and 9. We will discuss these 6 questions. First we will start with second question, that is culture materialism. Under culture materialism, who do we discuss? Yes, under culture materialism, we should discuss the ideas and work of Marvin Harris. So first, describe briefly his approach. His approach is based on Marxist theory or Marxist approach of historical materialism. This is the basis of his approach. Using that approach, Marvin Harris framed his theory of culture. So, and Marvin Harris draw a diagram with a triangle where he looks at society in terms of 3 levels. So he trying to look at society in terms of 3 distinct levels. What are they? This is infrastructure, this is structure, and this is superstructure. Infrastructure is bottom, structure is the next level, then you have superstructure at the top. So he is thinking of society with 3 distinct levels. And then culture, define what is each of them. What is infrastructure, what is structure, and what is superstructure. So what is infrastructure? This consists of material aspects of society, that is technological, economic and reproductive aspects. Technological, economic and demographic or reproductive aspects are part of infrastructure. Then we have structure. Structure consists of domestic and kinship systems, domestic systems, kinship systems, family marriage, kinship systems and political economy. And superstructure consists of ideological and symbolic aspects like religion. So just describe what each of them includes. This is ideological and symbolic aspects, and this is material aspects like technology and economy. And this is nothing but domestic and kinship system and political economy. So describe what each of them means, and then the central idea in this approach is that culture materialism believes that we should give more importance to infrastructure in the analysis of society. They believe that infrastructure, that is production and reproduction, dominate and determine all the other sectors of culture. So they believe that of the three levels, infrastructure is the most important level. And infrastructure decides and shapes. It is a driving force behind structure and superstructure. So he is saying that we can break down society into three levels. And of the three levels, infrastructure is the most important level compared to all the other two. And all the other two, the non-infrastructural aspects, are created to serve the infrastructural growth. So he is, in this statement you can understand what he is trying to say. That is, systems such as government, religion, law and kinship are considered to be constructs that only exist for the sole purpose of promoting production and reproduction. So production and reproduction, according to him, are the driving forces of society. And where do we have production and reproduction? Where do we have production and reproduction? We have this in the infrastructural level. Along with this, cultural materialism was also an approach that we find this approach in Marvin Harris's famous book, The Rise of Anthropological Theory. In the book, The Rise of Anthropological Theory, we find his approach. And Marvin Harris is one person who strived to make anthropology as much scientific as possible, and he believed that cultural materialism as an approach is the best way to introduce scientific rigor and more empirical or field research into anthropology. So he believed that we can make anthropology more serious and more scientific if we follow materialist approach. So you can, again, one student drew this diagram and I picked this from her script. So she very elegantly showed what is infrastructure, what is structure, what is superstructure, and then the components. Infrastructure involves modes of production and modes of reproduction. Structure involves domestic economy as well as political economy. Domestic economy means family and probably marriage. Then superstructure includes religion, myth and philosophy. So this is how you can use diagrams to elevate your answers. And then discuss the ideas of Marvin Harris with the famous example. What is the example that he gave for culture materialist study? That is, he studied why there is taboo on cow slaughter among Hindus in India. And he discussed this taboo is part of superstructure. Taboo is part of superstructure. And he says the taboo is present in superstructure because the infrastructure in India is agrarian. The infrastructure is agrarian or agricultural level. So we have an agricultural economy, and in this agricultural economy, cow plays a very important role where it supplies many essential services like traction, fertilizer, manure, milk. Dead cows give skin, and cow meat is used as protein source by the poor who clear the cattle. So because of all these functions that cow is serving in agricultural economy, he proposes that we have a superstructure, that is, we have a taboo, that is, the religion has created a taboo against cow slaughter. So because cow slaughter is not good for the economy or good for the infrastructure. That is how you can talk about culture materialism. Clear? Next, we will discuss postmodernism. Postmodernism is very easy. So first, whenever you talk about postmodernism, very simply discuss postmodernism. First, it's an approach that evolved into anthropology from philosophy. It is not an approach that is native to anthropology. And postmodernism essentially believes that we have multiple truths. It's an ideology which believes that we have multiple truths rather than a single truth. And it's an idea, it's an approach that also believes that science is supposed to help us understand the world, but it believes that science is being controlled by the powerful and the elite. So there are multiple truths, and science is the mechanism through which we get our truth, that is, we get our understanding of the world. But increasingly, this science is also being controlled by the powerful and the elite. So anthropology is also part of science, and as a result, anthropology is also being controlled by the powerful and the elite. So they conclude that anthropology is supposed to be a subject that helps us understand how people are, but in reality, anthropology is being used by the powerful sections to exploit the powerless sections. That is the conclusion. So what is their alternative then? If this is how science is being misused, what should we do? Their alternative is that anthropology must become a activist discipline. Anthropology must become a activist discipline. That is, anthropology should work independent of powerful sections and elites. Anthropologists should not accept funding from powerful sections, from governments or companies, but anthropologists must work like activists who fight for people's rights on their own. Do we have any examples of anthropologists who have done this? For example, Verrier Elvin in India is an example of postmodernist approach. He worked extremely independently and only for the welfare of people. Likewise, we also have another anthropologist called P.K. Baumik. He took up a welfare project for the benefit of the Lodha people. Lodha DNT, denotified tribe. He created for them a welfare home. And this project is called Vidisha project. This is called Vidisha project. So we can describe this. Along with that, you can talk about some famous thinkers, postmodernist thinkers, discuss the ideas of some famous postmodernist thinkers. And whenever you talk about postmodernism, two thinkers you cannot avoid, you should definitely include. That is Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida. Then third, you can include Latier, Jean-Francois Latier. You can also include another person called Baudrillard, if you have the space. Then somebody else called Feyerabend. Even Clifford Geertz is an example of, because towards the end even he became postmodernist. There are others like Nancy Schefter, Hughes, so on. I've here captured the ideas of Michel Foucault. So Michel Foucault, he simply says that, we construct our reality. He gives an example of how war on terror is constructed as different from terror. So there is supposedly terrorism, that is where terrorists kill innocent people. To solve this, American armies go and invade Iraq or Afghanistan. That is called war on terror. But objectively speaking, war on terror or terror both involve innocent people being killed by some people. But here this is framed as negative, this is framed as necessary and good. So the way we frame something, according to him, changes our perception. Likewise, he gives two examples of how Holocaust is also another example. And so he concludes that this is the most important point. The way we define a problem changes the way we perceive the world. So if you think of terrorism as killing of people by anybody, then terror or war on terror, both are wrong. But then we define it such that terror is considered as undesirable, war on terror is considered as fine. So he says we construct our reality. How do we construct our reality? Through something he calls as discourses, that is through our popular discourse. And discourses are shaped by power through media, and other things, and hence he concludes that power disciplines knowledge. So we can explore his ideas in terms of this flowchart. Reality is constructed. It is constructed through discourses. Discourses are shaped by power, and hence power disciplines knowledge. Then you can also add the ideas of Derrida. Derrida says his central idea is that language shapes our thinking. That is, the way we use a particular language, it can shape our thinking. And he says language has many assumptions, many hidden assumptions that we tend to forget. And he says the reality is so complex than what language can capture. So for example, a person can be, in language we only have two words, good and bad. But a person can be mix of good and bad. So when you describe a person, will you say he is 0.7 good, 0.3 bad? No, you will say he is good or bad, that's all. But the reality is that he is both good and bad. But language cannot capture this complexity. So he says language shapes our thinking. And initially when we talk about a person, we think, yeah, he is good and bad. But then if you have to describe in one word to somebody, you'll say, yeah, he's a good person. And by repeatedly calling him good, good, good and good, at some point you forget that you actually thought he's both. You now begin to think he's only good. You forget that he used to be bad also. That's how he says language tends to complicate our thinking. So we use language describes the world around us through binary oppositions. That is, language describes the world around us in terms of two opposite words, good or bad, love or hate. But reality is much more complex. The world is more complex than what the words can describe. World is more complex than what words can describe. And so he says, what should scholars of social sciences do? They should do deconstruction. That is, they should take language, break it down and expose these hidden assumptions or hidden meanings that we take for granted in language. Then another person is Jean-Francois Latied. Latied says, in social sciences, we are all focusing on big theories like the ones proposed by Karl Marx, Max Weber or Durkheim. And he says big theories or meta-narratives are wrong ways of looking at the world because these narratives are oversimplifying the world. Hence he says we should look for small localized narratives. But the joke isn't the idea that we should not have a big theory in itself, isn't it? So the idea that we can't have a big theory to describe the world is a big theory in itself. So that is how we can look at the ideas of postmodernism. Describe first what is postmodernism and then finally talk about the ideas of a few important thinkers. Then we have symbolic anthropology. Under symbolic anthropology, some of you wrote multiple people. No, just focus on Victor Turner. So first describe who he is. He is a British anthropologist influenced by the ideas of Emile Durkheim, and influenced by these ideas of Emile Durkheim, he wanted to understand how social cohesion is achieved in society, and especially he wanted to understand how social cohesion is created in society through symbols, how symbols help in creating social cohesion in society. And especially he was focused on, his approach involves 3 steps. What are they? First, he identifies what are the symbols in society. Then studies the meaning of symbols. And then he analyzes the role of symbols in strengthening society. What is the role of these symbols in strengthening society? So this is the broad discussion that you can capture. And then especially he focused on which symbols. He focused on ritual symbolism. He focused on study of rituals. In particular, he had rites of passage in mind, and he studied rites of passage within the framework of Arnold von Gennep, and Arnold von Gennep broke down rites of passage into 3 steps or 3 phases: preliminal, liminal, and postliminal. So Victor Turner also focused on studying rites of passage using the same framework, and we find his ideas in his famous book. Just whenever you write about thinkers, please try to see if you can quote some of their important books. We find his ideas in his book, The Forest of Symbols. The Forest of Symbols. We find his ideas in that book, and then discuss the example. For instance, he studied in this book the Dembu society, and within this society he focused on one ritual called the Kanga ritual. This is a puberty ritual, and then discuss how he interprets the symbolism of this ritual. So this ritual happens around a tree which secretes lot of latex. So people call it as a milk tree. He says people call it as a milk tree probably because of the matrilineal nature of their society. Then he interprets how in this society, in this ritual, there is a event where women come together and curse men. He says this cursing event is also symbolic of the tension that exists between men and women in this society, and so on. So he makes some observations based on this Kanga ritual. He tries to understand the Dembu society, discuss the findings of Kanga ritual. In the class notes that I discuss, I clearly explain what the Kanga ritual and what Victor Turner inferred from this Kanga ritual as well. That's it. Next we have David Schneider and kinship studies. This is a little material is generally not available for this. That is why I shared the handout on the group. I shared a handout on the group for David Schneider. Please go through the handout on the group, and there you have enough content to write for David Schneider. So I'll just briefly explain what he did. David Schneider's approach is also symbolism only, but he used symbolic approach. If Victor Turner used symbolic approach to the study of rituals, David Schneider used symbolic approach to the study of kinship. And we call his approach to study of kinship as cultural approach to the study of kinship. And where do you find his ideas? We find his ideas in 2 books. The first is called American Kinship. The first is called American Kinship. A cultural account. The second is called A Critique of the Study of Kinship. These are the 2 studies. So basically what he's trying to say is that generally people look at kinship, the Western approach to study kinship. He says the Western approach to kinship is a biological approach. That is, it shapes kinship as a biological relationship, or it's a relationship rooted in the biology of people. That's the Western notion of kinship. But he says this is not true. He criticizes this. He criticizes this, and instead he says kinship should be studied as a culturally defined relationship. Who we consider as kin depends on the kind of cultural notion or cultural meaning we attribute to kinship. That is the point he tries to make. In some culture, some people, both mother's side, father's side are considered as kin, in some no. In some cultures, those who are not part of blood ties are also considered kin, whereas in some only blood ties are considered kin, and so on. We have a lot of variations. And then he says, in general in society we have two kinds of systems. We have normative systems and cultural systems. He uses this framework of normative systems and cultural systems. In the handout on page 3, I explained this clear write-up of what is cultural system and what is normative system. And he says the cultural system is part of normative system. So, cultural system is part of normative system, and normative system is like a rule book of what should be done, what should not be done. Within that, cultures evolve their own meanings and layers of significance. And finally conclude by saying, and examples, you can say he studied American kinship system. He also studied people on the Yap Island using this approach, along with studying American kinship. You can write this, and finally conclude by saying that thanks to Schneider's perspective of cultural approach, we have seen the beginnings of new kinship studies in anthropology. What are these new kinship studies? In these new kinship studies today we are studying various things like gay marriages, we are studying single families, same-sex marriages, gender equality, gay rights, increasing number of people choosing to not get married. So wider range of kinship studies which are relevant to the present society have been taken up under the influence of David Schneider. That is 7th question. Next is 8th, interpretative approach of Clifford Geertz. So first define who is Clifford Geertz, American anthropologist. Who was he influenced by? He was influenced by the ideas of Max Weber. And here, what is his famous book? His famous books, there are two. One is called The Interpretation of Culture. Another is called The Social History of an Indonesian Town. These are his two famous studies, and describe his ideas. So he believes that culture is a shared code of meaning. And he looks at culture as a text. Culture is like a text, and the role of anthropologist is to interpret this text and see what it could mean. The role of anthropologist is to discover the hidden meaning of this text. And how should we do this? For this he proposes that we should do a case study approach, and that is take a event and focus on it and do a focused study of an event, and he calls that focused study of an event as thick description. This idea was given to him by another person called Gilbert Ryle. So this is the broad framework, and using this approach he studied the cockfights in Bali. Using this approach he studied Balinese cockfights. Now we can discuss what he found there. So there he found things like, first he gives simple facts of cockfights, where they happen, at what time. Second, he talks about the amounts of betting. People are placing high amounts of bets, and he says the amounts people are placing in these bets are unusually high. So he says people are not betting based on economics, but people are betting based on emotional reasons like prestige, status, honor, etc. Then he says betting also helps us understand horizontal structure of society. How people bet not on a cock, not based on whether the cock has chances of winning or losing. People bet on the side of their cock. If it is their lineage person's cock, they'll bet. If it is their clan's cock, they'll bet, and so on. So people have to cheer their own cock. They can't go and say, if you lose anyway, I'll bet against the other fellow's cock. They can't do that. So depending on who they're betting, that is, these are all called as betting alliances. These are all called as betting alliances. We can understand the horizontal structuring in society, different kinds of groups and their kinship relations. And not just that, we also can understand vertical structure of society or the hierarchy within society. So you can use this diagram. So if this is society, at the top of society, so you find that there are some who are placing high bets on the main event. The main event is called deep play. Main event is between two champion cocks. So here, those who belong to the highest status group in society are only placing bets. Next, you have other cockfights. These are also cockfights, but these are not like the favorite cocks or champion cocks. So here, group which is next level in hierarchy is placing bets. Then you have those who are placing no bets but only watch the fights. These are the third level of group in society. Then there are those who are neither placing bets on the main event or subsidiary events, or who are even watching. These are people who are just involved in other small folk games around the event, like some dice games, some card games, and so on. These are the people who belong to the lowest group in society. So he says, by taking a case like the cockfights, he says we can understand the nature of the Balinese society in this manner. And all of this is what he calls as interpretation of culture. And of course, Gates concludes by saying, this is only my interpretation, this need not be the final interpretation. That is where Gates makes a turn towards postmodernism. He is saying, this is only my interpretation. I do not claim that this interpretation will be the final ones, or this interpretation will be the only one. And then discuss criticism. Criticism is that it is highly subjective. Everybody has their own interpretation. Then what is anthropology supposed to do? If everybody is having their own individual interpretations, then what do we call as a scientific or informed interpretation? So this approach has a very high element of subjectivity, and because of the subjectivity, we cannot have practical applications using this approach. That's the criticism. And also, right, in the end you can conclude with significance. Significance saying that this approach marks a turn in anthropology towards more sensitivity. Anthropology is being more sensitive to the people by saying that we have to study people in their context, understand their meaning, instead of assuming that we know everything about them. That's it. Then we go to the last question of the day. This is Neo-evolution. So first, draw a brief background. What is Neo-evolution? How Neo-evolution emerged? So first say we had classical evolution. It was armchair anthropology and it was ethnocentric, and the whole schemes of classical evolutionists were found to be wrong. So to correct those anomalies, Neo-evolutionist approach was formed, and both Stewart and Leslie White believed in Marxist framework of society. They took a Marxist framework. What is Marxist framework? Marxist framework is something like this. They believe that society can be thought of in terms of base and superstructure, and they propose that base determines superstructure, and base involves mode of production. Sorry, base involves two things. One, means of production. Two, relations of production. And superstructure involves things like religion. This is Marxist theory. Leslie White took this Marxist theory and he slightly modified it. He said society can be thought of into three terms. This is Leslie White. That is ideological, sociological, I made a mistake. This is not ideological, but this is technological. Technological, sociological, and society can be thought of in three levels. And he says technological aspects determine sociological and ideological, and ideological aspects in return condition the technological aspects. This is the idea of Leslie White, and then discuss it with an example. He gives an example of female beauty, how what is considered as beauty changes with base. In societies which are hunting gathering, fat women are considered beautiful, but as society moves towards food abundance like our own society, beauty is shaped by not in terms of fatness but being very lean. So he says female beauty, which is an ideology, is being altered by the society's technology. When you're a hunter-gatherer, beauty means to be fat. When you're agricultural with surplus production, beauty means to be lean. So give that example and discuss his law of cultural evolution. What is his law of cultural evolution? E into D, T drives C. That is, culture evolves as the amount of energy harnessed per capita increases, or as the technological efficiency with which the energy is harnessed increases. So describe his law of cultural evolution in terms of E into T shaping C. And then discuss his stages. He gives stages. So he's saying that culture evolves. Culture is, according to him, culture is a energy capturing system. Culture is a energy capturing system, and culture evolves as the amount of energy captured increases or evolves. And he describes culture in terms of different stages. First, he says, is a stage where we used stone tools. Then we only had muscle energy. Then we have domestication of animals. Neolithic stage. Then we, along with using muscle energy, we also got animal energy. Third, he says, is industrial revolution. Here we began to learn how to use fossil fuels. And fourth, he predicts that there will be a fourth stage where we will shift towards atomic energy. This is the next level of cultural evolution. That is Leslie White. Then Julian Stewart. Julian Stewart's approach is called as cultural ecology. Describe his approach as cultural ecology and explain this. What is cultural ecology? according to him, take the same Marxist framework, he believes that technology plus environment shapes the other aspects. Technology plus environment shapes the other aspects. So his hypothesis is that societies that resemble one another in terms of technological level and environmental features will also be similar to each other in all the other aspects of culture. So if two societies have same technology, same environment, then they will also be similar in all the other aspects of culture. That is his thesis. Then what are the examples he gives? You can take, here you can just write one example, but if it is a full-fledged question, you can write more examples. One, he gives an example of Shashanian people who are hunter-gatherers. He can also take the example of pig feasts. These two are examples for cultural ecological approach. And then based on cultural ecological approach, he says, he gives, there are three types of evolution. There are three types of evolution. First is called unilinear evolution. Second is called universal evolution. Third is multilinear evolution. Unilinear are classical evolutionists. Their thinking is called unilinear. White is called universal. And multilinear is, Stewart says, his approach is called multilinear evolution. So he says, because of cultural ecology, he proposes that we will have multiple different streams of evolution. We should not think of evolution in terms of one single line like these people. That is savagery, barbarism, civilization everywhere. Instead, he says, evolution should be thought in terms of multiple possible trajectories. We can have different lines of evolution depending on the different kinds of environment that we may have. And close the discussion. So by saying that Stewart criticized White, saying that White's theory is too general. White criticized Stewart, saying that Stewart's theory is too detailed. So their students, Marshall Salins and Service, reconciled the ideas of both these people, and they said, we can combine the ideas of both of them into two things, general evolution and specific evolution. General evolution and specific evolution. General evolution is the approach of White. Specific evolution is the approach that we can use for Stewart. That's it. Right? So with that, we will close this discussion, and thank you for being here.